Meth 101 and polysubstance use in rural communities. Again, my name is Kevin Mullins. I am District Judge for Letcher County. The number of people in the Commonwealth, the United States, and the world who are using methamphetamine has skyrocketed over the past couple of years. Despite the prevalence of this epidemic, few people have taken time to learn about this drug, its effect on the individual user, its effect on their families, and its effect on our communities. I believe that part of this is based upon the fact that it is a complicated and complex subject. It's surrounded by a number of unfounded myths, mysteries, and misinformation. In order to try to help you understand this drug and its effect, I'm going to try to bring out in my presentation some normal, everyday examples that people are familiar with. I'm also going to do a lot of comparison with cocaine because, believe it or not, cocaine played a big role in the development of methamphetamine. And I have a belief that people are somewhat more familiar with the concept of cocaine than they are methamphetamine. I'm going to begin my presentation with what I call the prevalence of the problem. And the first slide that we have up here is actually a document from the Administrative Office of the Courts that demonstrate cases by drug case from 1996 to 2019. Okay. In Kentucky, we do have the benefit on methamphetamine that we have 4 specific cases or charges that pertain to methamphetamine. We have possession of methamphetamine, possession of methamphetamine precursors, manufacturing meth, and trafficking meth. So it makes it pretty easy to chart and document the numbers. The numbers on this slide show methamphetamine in red. And as you will note, methamphetamine is currently dominating all cases that come through the court system statewide. In fact, it looks like in 2019 there were 35,000 meth cases compared to only 7,000 heroin cases. So roughly 5 times greater amounts of methamphetamine cases than there are heroin cases. In turn, anytime a drug is seized in reference to a case in Kentucky, it's sent to one of 6, I believe, crime labs that's operated by the Kentucky State Police. The Kentucky State Police put out quarterly reports showing what drugs were sent to their labs for analysis. In the second quarter of 2020, this is the graph that shows the amount of what substances were tested. This was the first time that methamphetamine was 50% of all substances sent to the Kentucky crime lab. So in essence, if you had a basketball court and took half court and put methamphetamine on one side and put all other drugs on the other side, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, prescription pain pills, benzos, they would be the same. Unfortunately, this is not a new occurrence. This is not a fluke occurrence. The quarter prior to this, methamphetamine was 49% and some change. So methamphetamine appears to be the overwhelming illegal drug of choice in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Here is the same chart put with exact numbers showing the exact number of samples of methamphetamine that were received compared to the other substances. If you add up the fentanyl, heroin, prescription pain pills, that comes up to about 60% of the methamphetamine numbers in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So we've clearly established there's a great problem in the Commonwealth, but guess what? We're not alone. All drug testing facilities in the United States report to the National Forensic Laboratory Information Service, which is a part of the DEA. And they keep track of numbers of samples that were submitted to labs throughout the state. Their latest report, the 2019 report, which is what I'm showing you, shows that methamphetamine samples clearly dominate the number of samples that were sent in the United States at over 400,000. The second drug is marijuana, which that was a big change because for a long time marijuana had been the number one tested substance in America. So obviously a problem in America. Worldwide, the United Nations, they look at numbers worldwide to see what the problem is. And they've put out their 2019 report, which I'm showing you on this slide, the cover sheet. And then this was their findings. Their findings show that worldwide, marijuana still continues to be the number one drug of choice. The next would be what they refer to as ATS, which would be somewhat the stimulant category. The amphetamine category, which is 17%. Opioids is slightly behind that. They have their own category for cocaine, which is obviously another stimulant. So worldwide, methamphetamine use is on the rise as well. This is a graph that shows seizure amounts of methamphetamines through 2017. And that number appears to be in the blue, or what's showing on my screen is a blue-greenish line. When I first looked at this screen and came across this graph, I looked at it and I said, that graph looks familiar. I've seen something close to that before. That graph of worldwide capture of methamphetamine or seizure, if you look at it and compare it to Kentucky's cases of methamphetamine on the red, you can almost put one on top of the other. I mean, they're completely parallel. Just like Nancy said, how good things can travel worldwide, so can bad things. So if someone tells you that what's going on in Kentucky is not dependent upon what's going on in the world, in my opinion, that's completely false. So this is the prevalence of the drug. Next, I'm going to get into the history of the drug, because I truly believe you cannot understand methamphetamine today without having somewhat of an idea as to the background history of methamphetamine. In 1883, Sigmund Freud published a book called Über Coca, about or on coca or cocaine. At that period of time, Sigmund Freud was a paid sponsor for the cocaine industry, which was discovered years before methamphetamine. There were a lot of different products at that time that were using cocaine, such as the cocaine tooth drops with the children's pictures on them, which, as you'll see on the bottom, was put out in 1885. This period of time was the infancy of the current pharmaceutical industry. We're talking about a period of time prior to the discovery of aspirin, prior to the discovery of heroin. So we're talking about the real infancy of the pharmaceutical industry. There was a great push and a great touting of all the magical and mystical powers that cocaine could bestow upon its users. And that really drove a lot of scientists to look at other stimulants. It was very competitive in those early years. And the first scientist to really look at it was this gentleman, and his name is Nagai Nagaoshi. And trust me, it took me a long time to try to figure out how to say that. He was a doctor in Japan who had been sent to Berlin to also study medicine. And while in Berlin, he became fascinated with chemistry and organic chemistry, which was also gaining popularity at the time. He comes from Japanese royalty. When he returned home, he decided, I'm going to look at some of the Western medicines from my home of Japan and China, medicines that's been used for years and trying to figure out what's the chemical components to these medicines. And the first thing that he looked at was this shrub, which grows wild, and it's called ephedra. So he looks at ephedra, and ephedra has been documented to have been used, I believe it's 268 years prior to the birth of Christ. And what would happen in Japan and China, people would cut the stalks of the ephedra plant. They would put it in a container. They would dry it out. Anytime someone had hay fever, nasal congestion, etc., they would make a tea out of this shrub, and you would drink the tea and you would feel better and have a little bit more energy. So the doctor said, well, I'm going to look at what's inside this stalk that looks kind of like the end of a broom and figure out what's going on there. And he was actually the first person to discover ephedra, or excuse me, ephedrine. He was the first person to discover ephedrine. And this is chemically what the molecule ephedrine looks like. Okay? So this discovery occurred in 1885, and he continued working with ephedrine, which didn't really take hold very well because there was the people who had developed other medicines and stimulants had put forth a very aggressive marketing campaign. Epinephrine was another medicine that was out at that time that was marketed pretty heavily, and there really wasn't much use for ephedrine at that time. In 1893, he discovered methamphetamine, and that's the molecule for methamphetamine. And hopefully, if you'll bear with me, this will make a little sense just on the next slide. So if you look at the molecule for ephedrine compared to methamphetamine, you notice there is only one thing different. There's only one atom different between methamphetamine and ephedrine, and that's the molecule on the screen that's in red. That's one oxygen atom is the only difference between ephedrine and methamphetamine. So you have kind of the birth of methamphetamine. Methamphetamine really doesn't, again, take off. There's other drugs out there who are touting we're better. Okay? So nothing really takes place from its inception to 1919. The original discoverer of methamphetamine, his protege, a guy named Akira Ogata, comes up with a method to simplify the production of meth. And again, the simplification is, and if you do any look or reading about methamphetamine, you'll hear a lot about reduction. And all they're doing, especially in the methods pertaining to methamphetamine, is trying to reduce or eliminate that one oxygen atom. So the protege, Akira Ogata, came up with a method to make methamphetamine easier than it was done before. And in doing that, he used red phosphorus, and then there's some ingredients on the side that show you some common ingredients. Most common, it's the striker on a matchbook, contains red phosphorus, and iodine. And in this process, which is the next graph, you can see it's a fairly complicated chemical process. And in fact, in 1919, this discovery was actually the first discovery in making of what we call today crystal meth, because your end product on this particular method came out crystal meth. So again, methamphetamine and crystal meth were both developed by Japanese scientists. By the way, the fellow that discovered methamphetamine was the first doctor of pharmacy for Japan, and this was his contributions. After 1919, there was a little uptake in the use of ephedrine. Merck, which is a German pharmaceutical corporation, did begin marketing and distributing ephedrine in Asia. As you can see on this poster, appears to be somewhere between 1926 and 1927, they do start distributing ephedrine. But the real impetus, the real factor that brought meth into being and meth into use today was, by no doubt, World War II. Okay? And in World War II, there was a German Army officer, and I believe his name was Otto Ranke, R-A-N-K-E, who was charged with trying to come up with something to help the German war effort. And as part of this, he took 90 college students and started experimenting with them with ephedrine and methamphetamine. And at the conclusion of some very elementary trial results, he determined that it would be beneficial for the German army to distribute to their soldiers methamphetamine. As part of this, the German army, in their invasion into Poland, into France, sent a request out for 35 million methamphetamine tablets in a period of about 4 months. This is a photograph of Pervitin. Pervitin was actually a pharmaceutical company. The pharmaceutical company was actually Timler, who made methamphetamine pills. And that's what the pills look like. Here's also another packet, which was probably more akin to what Army soldiers were given, kind of in a day-to-day ration kit. For some reason, they were encouraged, I believe, to take 1 in the morning and 2 at night. So the amount of methamphetamine that was actually manufactured by Nazi Germany, we're talking in the millions. In fact, this is a photograph of Timler Pharmaceutical. And as I like to say, this is the Third Reich's meth lab. Here is a photograph of inside that facility showing the workers working to make meth and to distribute it in pill form is one of the means that they distributed it. The next photograph, I kind of give it away because I put a title to it. The sugar coating room at Timler Pharmaceutical. So these big copper vats were used to coat sugar with methamphetamine. Why would you coat sugar with methamphetamine? Because then they took the sugar and they made chocolate, which they gave to pilots. And they also gave these same chocolates to tankers. Pilots chocolate, tankers chocolate. But besides that, they also made it for candy for use by average everyday citizens. This is a actual commercial for Hildebrand chocolates, okay? And as you'll notice on the bottom right corner, the word there is just a different but very common spelling for methamphetamine. So besides making chocolate with methamphetamine in it, they clearly advertised on the front that, hey, this chocolate has methamphetamine. The ironic part is they encouraged housewives to eat more chocolates, which contained greater doses of Pervitin than what was distributed to the soldiers. I can't tell you the why on that one. Seeing some of the results that Germany had with methamphetamine, their blitzkrieg of certain nations, the rolling through of one nation after another by soldiers who were high on methamphetamines, the Japanese decided to follow suit. So they made their own version of methamphetamine, which was produced by a pharmaceutical company, and marketed under the name Philippon. The translation from Japanese to English of Philippon means for the love of work. The Japanese primarily gave these Philippon tablets to factory workers so that they could get shifts of 24, 36, 48 hours. So the factory workers were the main workers who received the Philippon tablets. Now the kamikaze pilots and the Banzai or storming soldiers, they received little bit different concoction of meth with some other chemicals to that. Unlike Nazi Germany, which by the end of World War II was pretty much completely out of everything. They had ran out of pretty much all supplies by the end of World War II, one of which being Pervitin. Unlike them, the Japanese weren't out of supplies. They had millions upon millions of tablets of methamphetamines that were not used or destroyed during the war. So I think we can all imagine what happened after the war was that there was this huge surplus of methamphetamine tablets to this depressed, defeated people. So what did they obviously do? They turned to these pills for a solution. And as part of that, by the time that Japan ultimately outlawed methamphetamine, which I believe was in 1951, a little bit greater than 5% of their population was clearly addicted to methamphetamine. It's easy for us to villainize Nazi Germany, Japan. Where did they get the idea to do such a despicable thing? They got the idea of where to do it from the 1936 Olympics. And how did they get it from the 1936 Olympics? Because the United States doped its athletes with ephedrine. They saw the success of American athletes in Berlin who were using ephedrine. So in all honesty, we came up with the idea. They just kind of took it to a whole new level. Again, not to villainize these other countries, the United States was equally or at part guilty. It was common for the United States to issue to their pilots Benzedrine. Benzedrine is an amphetamine. It's given, obviously, for you to stay awake longer, and primarily given to long-range bombers so that they could stay awake for large or long-distance flights. It was also given to certain sailors who were out looking for U-boats and submarines and so forth. So we were pretty common in issuing those, and in fact, here's a commercial or advertisement from Smith, Kline & Fritz, which is still an enormous pharmaceutical company today, pretty much saying, hey, it's good enough for the soldiers in the war, it's good enough for you at home. So with that, there became a large market at that time for amphetamine. And this one, stay fit and trim by taking amphetamine. The next is actually a commercial called Obitrol. And Obitrol has a very interesting history, and especially from Kentucky. As you can see, this advertisement is for Obitrol. It's a weight loss pill. The caption I always found funny is like, I'm either going to have to lose 45 pounds or it's going to have to snow 4 more inches, showing the overweight guy on the skis. The most scary part that I see about it is on the bottom there's a coupon. You can cut off, put in your name and address, send it in to them. They'll send you back a free sample. Okay. Kind of sounds somewhat normal until you realize what's in Obitrol. Obitrol was 1/2 methamphetamine, 1/2 amphetamine. Okay? So this is what you could get by the mail by simply sending in the coupon in the 1950s. Well, in 1973, and the reason why I have the 72 physician's desk reference, in 1973, there was some regulations that came out of the thalidomide problems to basically say that Obitrol could no longer cease to be in production because they didn't find it either safe or efficient. So with that, the pharmaceutical companies started off Obitrol Pharmaceuticals. It was sold to Rexall at that time. Rexall Pharmaceuticals says, okay, we'll just change the formula. We'll change the formula on this The FDA said this is not a good drug, so we're going to change the formula. We're going to get rid of the methamphetamine and just keep the amphetamine part. Does anybody know what that drug was called? Adderall. That's all Adderall is. Adderall, I mean, it's not my opinion. Adderall comes from Obitrol. I mean, it was the original company that just eliminated the meth salts from their compound. The reason why this has a Kentucky reference is at the time when it was banned or regulated, Rexall owned it, but at the time that Adderall, which I think they made that for ADD, for all, or for everyone, was actually being made by Richwood Pharmaceutical Companies. And guess where Richwood Pharmaceutical Companies is? Richwood, Kentucky. Just a little bit shy of south of Florence. So we have a pretty good connection with amphetamines up until this time, okay? With some of these restrictions, really wasn't a whole lot going on until in the 60s. In the 60s, biker gangs out in Western America, Western United States, determined that they could make methamphetamine from a chemical other than the ephedrine or pseudoephedrine that we talked about before. They determined that you could make methamphetamine based on a chemical called P2P, which is a form and a much longer name for a phenylacetone. At the time, phenylacetone or P2P was an extremely common ingredient for pool cleaners. So obviously if you're a biker gang out west, you're going to have plenty of access to pool cleaners. They determined you could make meth off, the only other way you can make it off ephedrine or pseudoephedrine is what's called P2P. The problem with P2P is, unlike ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, which is what they call a chiral molecule, which I picture it in my mind as a dice with the same number on every side. No matter how you throw it, it's going to come out right. P2P is not chiral, which means that half of the meth that you make is what's called D-meth, and the other half of what you make is called L-meth. Well, the D-meth is actually what most users are after because it gives you the euphoria, the quote-unquote high that most users are looking for. L-meth is just a common nasal decongestant. Still, meth is just the kind of the flip side of meth, okay? So with P2P, you make in one batch, that one batch is going to contain half D-meth and half L-meth. So in the 80s, a new method of making meth off the original ephedrine, pseudoephedrine came about called the Nazi method with, again, no direct correlation to Nazi Germany. In fact, to be specific, this is actually called a Birch reduction, which wasn't developed till 1944 by a gentleman by the name of Birch. It requires anhydrous ammonia, which again means without water, and sucks any kind of water out of you, causing severe burns. It also requires lithium, which is a metal. It's probably where they get the name Nazi method, because any kind of prolonged buildup of metals in your body causes a lot of psychotic behavior. So they came up with a Nazi method of making or manufacturing meth, and here's a slide to show what that looks like. I'm not trying to educate you on how to make meth because there's enough information on the web that you don't need me, but just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, if you can remember the first slide we looked at, the red phosphorus and iodine, how much larger and more involved in depth it was than this slide. They're making things simpler. With this slide, there's no heat source. And really, with this method is where you come up with the terminology of a meth cook. You no longer have to be a scientist or have some type of elementary scientific background to be able to manufacture meth. So this is the era in which the meth cook was determined. These are some photographs just showing you the anhydrous ammonia, which is a very common fertilizer used in farms. So obviously with that essential ingredient being in rural America, in farms, it was obviously subject to being stolen. And most of the time people would steal it and put it in a fire extinguisher, which just shows you the picture here of the fire extinguisher, and often those fire extinguishers would leak or explode, causing injuries to people trying to manufacture meth. Again, one of the requirements for this is the lithium out of batteries. Kind of a quick detail of how that is easily obtained from a battery. And I guess to make that one joke of my today, I guess this takes the meaning Energizer Bunny to a whole new level. With that became the one pot or the shake and bake method, which again is the making of meth just like the Nazi method off ephedrine or pseudoephedrine, which produces 100% pure D-meth, the strongest, most desirable meth. So it became where you could actually manufacture meth in a 2-liter or even smaller pop bottle. Okay, there's some descriptions there on the things that you need, none of which are very uncommon. Some of the ingredients could be obtained commercially or by such common items as like some cold packs. This is a picture of an old methamphetamine lab and how intricate, detailed, and how much space. Also back during the Nazi method, that was mostly used in rural America because of the foul odors and chemicals that could be smelled for quite a distance away. This is a photograph of a one pot or shake and bake meth lab. So as you see, we keep getting smaller and smaller, and now we're down to the size of what looks to be an igloo cooler. In 2005, Congress enacts the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act. Kind of funny, enacted in 2005, but didn't, in the name of it, but it didn't come into effect till 2006. And that is the law that puts the restrictions on obtaining the ephedrine and pseudoephedrine that we now have, where they're behind the counter in the pharmacist, and only a pharmacist or a pharmacist tech can dispense those to you. When they do, your name, driver's license, etc. is written down, and some states put that into a database. Now with that, the number of meth labs in the United States, as you can see, went down from a total of 23,700 in 2003 down to about 1,568. So the Combat Methamphetamine Act was a great success on eliminating methamphetamine production in the United States. It was a ginormous success in eliminating explosions, fires, burns upon people, toxic chemicals being dumped in our communities. So with that, a fabulous success. However, that success was very short-lived. If you will look at the chart that I have here, as you'll note, at that time methamphetamine was approximately going for $150 a gram, and the purity of methamphetamine was very poor, in the 30%. With the reduction of ephedrine, pseudoephedrine, and P2P, the Mexican cartels jumped in. They saw their opportunity and they seized that opportunity. And this is the most recent numbers. By virtue of them seizing that opportunity, and they primarily manufacture meth under the P2P method, which again is half D and half L meth, the price of methamphetamine plummeted. Nationwide, it looks like at the least amount in 2017 was $56 a gram. And if you're not familiar with what a gram looks like, a packet of Sweet and Low was 0.97 grams. Add in the weight of the package itself of 0.03, and it is a perfect 1 gram every time. So the price of meth went from $150 to $56 in certain areas, which came out to an average of the $56. So the price dropped. As you can see, the purity skyrocketed, reached a high of 97% nationwide. Currently, almost all of our meth comes through the southwest United States. In Arizona, the meth purity reaches high 98%. In Kentucky, our meth, by the time it is distributed here, assuming that it came from Mexico, is down to about 73%. So let's talk about what is this drug that we've studied the history of since its inception. Methamphetamine is a white powder, odorless drug that can come in its purest form as a powder, can also come as a crystal. It can also come as in a pill form. Methamphetamine by its very nature is very easily soluble in water, makes it very prime to be injected. The main ways that methamphetamine are used is it's smoked, obviously preferred there would be crystal meth. It's injected intravenously. It's snorted. With that, obviously the powder would be preferable. Obviously with the snorting versus the snorting and injecting, you don't have to carry around a pipe. You don't have to carry around a butane lighter. You don't have to carry around a syringe. You don't have to carry around a tourniquet. You just carry your 1 little gram of meth in whatever pocket purse that you decide. Again, like we talked about the Pervitin and the pills, methamphetamine can be ingested orally. Believe it or not, there is one medicine that is still currently approved by the FDA, and with the appropriate prescription you could obtain from your pharmacy, which does contain methamphetamine, and that's the name of the pill and its image on the right. Another means of ingesting methamphetamine is what's called a hot rail. A hot rail is where you make a fine line of the powder. The hot would be the glass that you heat. Instead of putting that pipe in your mouth as like the normal smoking, you actually put it in your nose, and you actually obtain the benefits of both worlds of smoking and snorting. Here's a quick video of someone actually showing you how to hot rail methamphetamine. As you notice, the tube is placed in his nose, the hot glass pipe is placed on the methamphetamine, and there you have it. What are the effects of meth? The effects of meth are increased alertness, decreased appetite, a sense of well-being, and effects that can last between 8 to 24 hours, okay? There is some, obviously, side effects of meth that we'll get to in a minute. How meth works is very similar to how an opioid works. It affects the release of dopamine, the feel-good portion of your brain. It gets you that incredible feeling of well-being, goodness, etc. Unlike opioids, which cause a sedative or response, methamphetamine actually triggers some adrenaline responses, which is what causes the stimulant, the sleepless nights, the ability to do a lot of different manual chores that you could not otherwise do so. That's kind of represented in the next photograph or slide that shows you how it stimulates the reward centers of the brain. Again, some of the other problems with methamphetamine, it does make long-term changes in the brain that can be seen by different images. The blue portion of the brain would be the normal portions, the red would be the portions of the brain in this particular model that has been affected by methamphetamine use. Some of the problems with methamphetamine use, and especially extended methamphetamine use: psychotic behavior, paranoia, aggression, anxiety, fatigue, depression, delusions, mood swing, confusion, insomnia, and hallucinations. Can be a cause for stroke, brain damage, weight loss, and death. Now, with a lot of these adverse effects, kind of the new trend that we're seeing locally and in the nation is what I'm going to jump to, is what's called polysubstance use. I really truly believe that all this will be, meth will be the underlying use or addiction. The other substances that will be used to counteract the negative aspects of methamphetamine. This slide is basically a goofball versus a speedball, okay? A speedball is historically cocaine and heroin. It's been in existence for quite a period of time, and the reason why it's been around is that cocaine and heroin are fairly evenly matched as far as strength, okay? A goofball, on the other hand, is if you mix methamphetamine and heroin in a single dosing unit. And the street name for that is a goofball. And the reason why they call that a goofball, it would be kind of akin to us taking NoDoz and Lunesta, I think their commercials are the better sleep faster medication at the same time. It causes a lot of conflict within your body to an extent, but the main reason that it is called a goofball is the methamphetamine is so much stronger than the heroin, it makes no sense as to why you're doing it. This is actually a photograph of arrest here in Letcher County. Is the polysubstance use, the methamphetamine being the white, the brown being the heroin, the pill and syringe, or excuse me, the pipe and the syringe. This was found on one gentleman. I think we will see more. By polysubstance, what I mean is a process called feathering. Someone will be on meth. They will use meth in the morning, get them awake, motivated, get them through the day. At the end of that day or at some point in time that they want to obtain some rest, some relief from the methamphetamine, then they will use the heroin or fentanyl. This is not in the same dose. It's a process called feathering. Some of the adverse effects that we've seen of meth is the paranoia. This was actually an arrest here in Letcher County. With this paranoia, we've seen an increased amount of people who, even with meth possession or meth trafficking, are armed at the time of their arrest. That appears to be increasing. However, there is no scientific study that shows that just simply meth use will increase overall violence in a community. And what you're talking about there is violence maybe against someone who's not in that. What the literature does clearly show is that there's a huge impact upon families, especially back, or if someone is still one of the 1,500 people who are manufacturing meth with the toxic chemicals. But more importantly, and what I've seen in the court system, is a dramatic increase in the cases for child removal from the cabinet for families and children based upon meth use, and most of that appears to be directly correlated to incidents of domestic violence or abuse. The Arizona HIDTA Task Force has a website which is a fabulous resource on a lot of different substances, but especially methamphetamine. In California and Arizona, we talked about the biker gangs of the 60s and 70s and their role in distributing the early distribution of P2P meth. Arizona and California have experienced the problems that we've had with opioids, probably in the same or similar timeline. So anytime you deal with any issue in reference to methamphetamine, these are the people that you look to, because like us, we've been at it the longest. Their website has a lot of different beneficial aspects to it. One of the best things, it has a thing called Meth 360, which is a PowerPoint presentation, which they actually encourage people to use to take to their communities to demonstrate the effects of meth. And it has the ability where you can insert personalized slides, pictures, photos, etc. I wanted to go over that kind of feel-good aspect before I went over the next video. The next video that I'm showing you was actually obtained by the Arizona HIDTA Task Force. And what makes this video so strong is none of this is recreated. This is actually surveillance footage from a home in Arizona. As you will notice, these people are methamphetamine. Here in a moment, you will notice clearly users and also clearly methamphetamine dealers. As part of their paranoia, and the lady has brought out her bag of methamphetamine right now. As part of their paranoia, they have their home wired with a number of security cameras, which gives you great access into actually their day-to-day lives and what's going on in these people's homes. So this is not a recreation. This is actually footage from the Arizona HIDTA Task Force that I saw at a seminar, and then after some persistent begging, they finally just gave it to me. So this is in a home in Arizona. The same lady again, this is her boyfriend or paramour. They get into a domestic altercation. which is obviously clearly shown by their own security cameras. During this domestic altercation, the young son comes in and tries to stop the situation. With the male assaulting the female. And also at some point in time, his sister comes in with a toy gun. And as you'll notice, while the gentleman's assaulting the female, the little girl is toying with the gun and what appears to be now putting it under her chin. Did everybody catch the last part of what the little girl did? At one part in the video, you can kind of see her clearly, what I will refer to as ratcheting the video. At some other parts, you see her kind of not for certain showing what she's doing under her chin. I make the assumption she's putting the toy gun under her chin. The very end scene of that is no doubt the little girl doing this with the gun to her head. See, and what this shows is some of the local marijuana dealers have become upset because they believe these people were selling methamphetamines to 15-year-old kids. So they come over to confront them about it. And in the process of the confrontation, the same woman who was beaten by the guy pulls a pistol and she shoots and kills one of the confronters. Okay, the scene there, you can see the body bag of where the person who's just been shot is placed. Ironically, or sadly probably is a better choice of words, this story didn't end here. The two people were arrested. The video was shown, their bond was reduced, and they were released from jail. Immediately from release from jail, the two children that you had seen in the photograph, or the slides or video earlier, the two children were taken based upon the review of what you just saw and put in foster care and placed in another school. As soon as these two get released from jail, they go to school and grab these two kids and take off with them, which ultimately concludes in about a 100-mile police chase that the kids were retrieved and placed back into foster care. Kind of a little bit of an edgy graphics, which I'm not a big fan of, but I'm a big fan of the work here. This is the Vancouver Injection Drug Use Survey or Study. It's a multi-year study that was put on in Vancouver, British Columbia by the college there, along with Columbia University in New York, which analyzed IV drug users. And they put out a pretty comprehensive study that is cited pretty universally and never questioned. Well, the Vancouver Injection Drug Use Study actually came out with some surprising numbers. And their numbers were that if you use methamphetamine intravenously, that the odds of you attempting or committing suicide is 80 times greater than if you're addicted to any other substance on planet Earth. So it was pretty profound, and unfortunately I came about that the hard way because two of the people that we had sent to treatment in 2019, after they came back from treatment for meth IV use, killed themselves here in Letcher County. So I knew there had to be something, there was too big a correlation. So I came up with that, and one of the last things that I'm going to do, and I guess, is I'm going to play a video that kind of ties some of this together as far as the incidents of suicide, and then also with the ultimate hope of treatment. So I'm going to play this, which is...
You know, today as I look back on my life, I used to think that I had such a horrible life, not too good of a childhood, because my parents really didn't, to me in my eyes, they didn't care too much about me, you know. But, you know, the more I look back on my life and realize that the life I've lived, where I've been blessed in more ways than I can count. You know, my parents didn't raise me, but my aunt and uncle did. You know, they loved me enough to take care of me and provide for me. They put me in sports, and they kept me in sports to try to keep me out of trouble. And as I look back at this field, a lot of memories come rushing back. You know, played football, basketball, and baseball almost every single year. I was blessed to have them. You know, I really was.
Paul was 9-year-old when he came to our home. Him and his brother and sister. Paul was a good athlete. He worked hard, and he played real well. Had a great arm. Even at a 9-year-old kid, he could throw a curveball.
I remember the last game I actually played on this field. We was playing the Hazard Bulldogs. That year they were supposed to be in the best team in the region, and I had 15 strikeouts. Pitched a one-hitter shutout against number 1 team in the region. We beat them 2-0 in that game. That was the last game I ever had to play on this field. You know, sometimes it hurts to even think about it.
He had a good nature and was really well liked by all the people in our neighborhood and the family. Had a lot of friends. The older he got, the more he got into drugs, and you could see the change in him.
As my senior year, I was supposed to graduate, I think it was like May the 23rd or something like that, and then April 17, 2003, I got locked up for 2 counts of first-degree burglary, 2 counts of first-degree robbery, and 2 counts of first-degree assault. To say I was devastated would be an understatement. Didn't understand why it was happening or why it did happen or how God could let it happen. And tried to escape. Several guards got assaulted. And I knew I was hit then, you know, I did. Anyways, I finally got to take my original charges to jury trial and got acquitted of them. Proved I didn't have nothing to do with it, but I'd done made that bad situation worse by trying to escape. I was starting to wake up every day knowing there's more to life, but not knowing how to get there. And I was hating my life. Suicidal thoughts, depression, like something I never battled with, where I was kicking in strong and hard. And it was getting to the point where, you know, I didn't want to live anymore. I just bought a new car. I hadn't had it for a couple months. And I was actually going to go trade it for a gun. I was done, you know, I was like, I didn't want to live anymore. I was hopeless, I was lost. As I was in one of my buddy's house, little did I know that my car was being towed on a rollback, you know, like for no reason at all. And now when I look back at that, like, if that wouldn't have happened that night, I wouldn't be here today. Like, I was dead set, you know what I mean, I was gonna end it.
We saw his decline, and we got to a point where we hoped he would be put in jail to be safer.
I remember going to court, and Judge Mullins court ordered me to treatment for 30 days. They started telling me and started seeing stuff in me that I hadn't seen in a long time, started telling me that I didn't have to live like that no more, that I was meant for more, that I had purpose in my life, and started showing me. I seen so many addicts, so many people just like me, that was no different than I was, with their hands in the air, praising Jesus, you know. And that's when things really started to change for me. I started thinking, you know, well, maybe this might be for me. Maybe I can change too.
But God points us all in the direction He wants us to go. And I think He used even those situations and circumstances to take Paul to where he is now.
The people that I've met in ARC it's crazy, because, you know, they ain't no different than I am. They've been where I've been, they've done the things that I've done, you know, and they show me that there was hope, that I could change, that I could do something different. And that's what it's all about. That's why I'm standing here today, 16 months clean. In the last 20 years, I probably ain't had 16 months clean combined. And here I am working for ARC, doing something different with my life.
He's really been blessed lately. He's married to a great lady, got great kids. He's doing well with raising his children. He's being a godly dad and a godly example in front of them. He's even a godly example in front of me. I've tried to be one in front of him, but he's doing well.
I would like to thank everyone for watching my presentation. And I know to some it might have seemed that I went a little long and some it might have went a little fast. If you have any questions about what we're doing in Letcher County, any questions about the slides that you've seen today that we went by it too quick and you're like, oh, I really would like to see that, study it a little further, my email address is just Kevin Mullins, and it's at kycourts, with an S on the end of it, .net, or I also have another personal account, which is letcherdistrict@gmail.com, or my cell is 606-634-6949.